Good evening, folks, and welcome to Quods Get Gold. I have a most interesting guest today. Larry Cunningham. He's a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. And he has a fascinating story. I'm going to tell you some of it, and I'm going to ask him later to fill in some blanks. Larry's retired from the Secret Service after a long and rather diverse career. Over 20 years, his duties there encompass supervisory experience in all aspects of Secret Service jurisdiction. As the agent in charge of the USS office located in San Jose, California, he coordinated and supervised the security arrangements for visiting dignitaries, to include Pope John Paul II, Michael Gorbachev, presidents of the United States, presidential candidates, and other foreign heads of state. His oversight of law enforcement personnel, motorcade routes, sites, and communications included the development and evaluation of crisis management and emergency contingency plans. Liaison duties included a 7-year membership on the Santa Clara County Law Enforcement Executive Council. Other responsibilities included the development and prosecution of numerous domestic and international criminal cases involving complex telemarketing, credit card fraud, computer hacking, and high-tech fraud operations. This is for you guys who think that the Secret Service only trots about limousines. His office developed precedent-setting cases resulting in updated federal criminal statutes. In these efforts, he streamlined the prosecution guidelines and procedures with the local district attorney and the U.S. Attorney's offices. Mr. Cunningham served on the Presidential Protective Division at the White House for 5 years and conducted international security advances for presidential visits to Canada, China, France, Grenada, and Germany, where his fluency in German was utilized. His other duties encompass protective detail training and the supervision of the security agents assigned to conduct the security advances during his assignment to the Secret Service Office of Training. Larry played a key role in the development of programs resulting in the implementation of new policies for the Secret Service. These efforts involved establishing new agent and in-service agent training curricula and the revision of the agent applicant hiring criteria. Noteworthy among these included the development of specialized training programs for agents assigned to the White House presidential detail, something that is going to come in handy during this interview. In addition, following the assassination attempt on President Reagan, Larry consulted with Dr. Kenneth Cooper of the Cooper Institute for Aerobics Research in Dallas and developed the Secret Service Mandatory Fitness Program. A major component of this included the implementation of a stress management curricula for in-service training. This innovative fitness program was established as policy and has subsequently been adopted by numerous federal law enforcement agencies, to include the U.S. Army, U.S. Postal Service, U.S. Customs Service, U.S. Marshal Service, and a number of police departments. He is affiliated with the Stanford Center for Research in Disease Prevention and has contributed to the development of a multi-factor risk reduction program for public safety officers. Now, I know, believe it or not, that I'm leaving several things in the inkwell on this one, but I think it's much better if we discuss it with Larry himself. Just a reminder, this series of Quods Get Gold, we do for the specific purpose of raising funds for the Gold Institute for International Strategy, of which Larry is a senior fellow. Right there under the screen, you will find a link to a donor box that I will flash every now and then to remind you. You can click on that link or copy, paste it on your browser, and you'll be able to go to a special page where you can make a tax-deductible contribution to the Institute that it may continue its valuable service to our country. And without further ado, I've spoke long enough. let's bring on board Larry Cunningham and complete the introduction. Guten Abend,
Well,
meine Herren. How are
well,
you
Saul,
doing, Larry?
well, great. And Saul, thank you for that very generous intro. Thank you. I'm honored to be with everyone this evening. And the reason I am is because I, as a American, a patriot, a former government servant, and also a former employee with the Secret Service, am disturbed by many of the things that are happening in our country right now. Um, no one of us is as smart or as strong as all of us. And unfortunately, all of us aren't here anymore. We're in two camps, maybe three camps. And that disturbs me. What I do right now is I train police, fire, and the military on proactive security measures, on predicated on having a team. In other words, fighting the enemy, whether it's a terrorist threat, a school shooter, or other criminal activity, or other things that threaten the nation. Since 9/11, I've been dedicated to training those groups to do just that, become more proactive. Prior to 9/11, we were very reactive as a group, whether it was military, police, even some of our federal agencies that protect us. And unfortunately, there's a real fallacy, an inherent fallacy with being reactive. Basically, what you're doing is you're going to clean up the mess after it's already occurred. So since 9/11, basically all of the institutes, all the organizations, all the agencies, the military, etc., have pushed their focus on becoming proactive. So basically, instead of just protecting and mitigating, we wanted to be preventive. So the whole strategy shifted. And since that time, since my retirement actually in 1994 from the Secret Service, I've been very actively involved in doing just that, trying to get everyone on the same sheet of music to be proactive. So my credentials didn't stop with my service in the Secret Service. I've done a lot of work with organizations, whether it's military organizations, corporations, schools, on helping them reorganize their security strategy and plans to do just that, become more proactive. Key element in this, of course, is to get everyone on board. Everyone has a role, not just the managers, not just the police, everyone, even the school children. Everyone sees things a little differently. So it's sort of a force multiplier. You've heard that term before. And that's where we are right now. And this is what I dedicate my life to right now. I do it in a lot of arenas. I train and um, organize strategies and plans for police, fire, the military. I train police all over the commanders, emergency managers. And the whole idea is to get them, when they do their plans, to put them together and train as a team. I'm also a premises liability expert. I'm hired to do many investigations for incidents that occur in various contexts. I also do a lot of speeches and a lot of training for a variety of other organizations as needed. So that pretty much summarizes it. Since my 20 years in the Secret Service, I have 28 years now in the private sector doing just what I described. So I'm honored to be here and would like to continue the discussion. So, Saul, what would you like to know? I can't hear you, Saul.
Sorry about that.
No
Uh,
problem.
our pleasure to have you. And what I want to know is so much that in the hour that we have, I don't think we're going to touch the service, but we can start with some things here. Um, Before I ask you about what I call Mara fiasco, because there are failures at every level in this thing. You mentioned being proactive, and this is something that I've been to many meetings. I have my own ideas about it, and I don't think we're there yet. I think that our society has an ingrained uh, culture of being reactive. And soon after an event, and everybody wails and throw ashes on their faces and tear their clothes and promise to do whatever is needed, then they forget about it. and we relax. And one fine day, we find that a couple of uh, men associated with terrorist groups spent months in D.C. Uh, pretending to be FBI agents and befriending agents of other agencies and exchanging gifts and being invited to cocktails. And fortunately, they were caught almost by chance, but we don't seem to be on alert as we should be.
Well, I completely agree with that. Candidly, I'd like to give it some context. Since 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security became an entity, and the rationale was to put everyone under that umbrella of DHS, Department of Homeland Security. So that meant FBI, CIA, Secret Service, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, customs, you name it. And the thought was if we put us under one umbrella, we'll all work together, we'll be more proactive, we'll get information in a more timely way. And the thought was to foster a great team. The sad reality is it was a great concept, but it was naive in the sense to think that these agencies would give up all their purview and now all of a sudden play in the sandbox and share all their toys. The reality is, as Saul has alluded to, is that it's actually created more walls within that small area. So we are actually still siloed, if you will. We still don't share information on a very timely basis. There's lots of intelligence that has come up in a variety of contexts for a variety of threats that haven't been addressed in a timely way because information has been siloed, secured. Perhaps folks have decided, agencies have decided, I'm going to hold this information, I'm going to investigate this myself. And this leads us to later commentary that we're going to discuss in terms of relationships with other agencies. If we don't share things in a timely way, how in the world could we possibly be timely in terms of identifying the threat and hopefully mitigating, if not preventing?
You'd say that Homeland Security, rather than provide a venue in which agencies could share, just added a couple of layers of bureaucracy while leaving intact the individual cultures. And they're still each playing in their sandbox and not lending their toys.
It's essentially it. And there's an ocean of data and evidence to show that. On the official DHS commentary, they would probably wouldn't be as candid as I have. But if you talk individually to folks and just look at results, we are not sharing information. It is almost as bad as it was during the Kennedy era, Kennedy assassination era. Information was out there. We didn't draw the points together. More recently, those of you that are familiar with the 9/11 Commission, it made the same statement. I was struck by the candor in that information. I use it a lot in my classes, and basically they said, it was a cataclysmic failure. Many agencies had information in an isolated way, but no one brought it together and said, let's look at this in total and decide what we can do. Case in point, tragedy, but the CIA and FBI had information about folks that wanted to learn how to take off with airplanes but not land. That's common knowledge. What you may not know is
Yep.
that there were agents in the mix that had intel that could pretty closely identify who these people were. For example, many of the terrorists, the 9/11 pilot terrorists, uh, took these classes, paid $4,700 to take the class in cash. Now, who in the world does that? We call that a clue in police work. And these kinds of things are brought to the attention of other agencies, but nobody put it together. The worst example
Yep.
was the NSA said that, well, we had information, but you're not at liberty to give it to the CIA or FBI. You have to come to us. That's published in the 9/11 Commission. So that's a
Yeah.
tragic um, team in terms of not sharing information. It'd be like the quarterback not giving all the information to the running backs and the blockers, only selective information. How in the world are you going to win your game?
You can't. Even today, a lot of people are totally unaware of the Madrid cell that was giving logistic and financial support to these people. And we knew about the traffic of money. The Spaniards knew about this cell. Um, they even had contacts with ETA, for crying out loud, which is, I always thought it was a rather interesting twist that nobody considered. And when the information is not shared, well, all of these things happen until it is too late. One of them was actually cooling his heels in a cell and couldn't show up for his plane duty.
Hmm.
And
That,
all the
that,
information that was a hijacker number 20, an Algerian of French citizenship,
yes.
whose computer was in the possession of the FBI, but nobody had looked into it where they would have found all the information they needed because they didn't think it was important.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of it has to do with structure, management structure, and the hierarchy. And moving back to 9/11, and I think it's relevant because we're still making the same mistakes. But the information is out there. Depending on how complicated your bureaucracy is, really can confuse or streamline the situation. Obviously, the FBI has a much larger bureaucracy than the Secret Service, and so maybe that accounts for some of the disconnect. But as I mentioned earlier, and it's well published, there are agents who knew that there were individuals that were planning to do something nefarious, taking flights. There were even folks that had inklings that they might use airplanes. All this information was out there, but nobody wanted to connect it. Now, here's the problem. Uh, the decision maker, the leader who gets all this information, decides what's relevant, what isn't, makes a decision where they're going to dedicate resources, how much of a priority they're going to put on it, and so forth. Unfortunately, in this case, the agent was female. She claims that that had something to do with it, and also other priorities apparently you know, overcame that key element.
Yes.
That individual resigned, wrote a book, and the rest is history. But sadly, this theme repeats itself on an ongoing basis.
Don't you see a pattern when you said the individual resigned and wrote a book? Uh, I'm one who believes that at this point we should ban any public servant from publishing a book within 10 years of their service because it seems to me that a lot of them are more interested in the book deal they might get than in the performance of their duties.
There are two sides to that, absolutely, absolutely. But the example I'm showing here is the disconnect between good intelligence, the agent or the investigator or the analyst on the street that gives the information up in the intelligence cycle,
Yes.
and for whatever reason, it's not properly presented, or there's bias
Yep.
in the manager, and it's not distributed in an effective way. That's a problem.
Yes. That is a problem. I don't know if this is correct. I seem to recall that there was an agent in Minneapolis who was desperately trying to call this to the attention of management
Yes.
without any success.
That is true, and those are just some examples. But the frustration to me is that most of this is not rocket science, as we say. It's pretty straightforward, and most of the classes, DHS classes that I teach, are with a proactive theme. But we're basically explaining, let's get all of us at some level to meet, collect the information, and make a unified decision. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And as a result, time goes by, the message gets diluted, and folks are basically crippled in terms of being able to deliver an effective response. And it's not complicated, but we have to become a
and and
team.
and they fall into old patterns.
Yes. So even though we are at this point, many years after the Kennedy assassination and many years later after 9/11, we are still making the same mistake. And Saul, if I could, I'd like to give you another example
Yes.
in the context of school shooters. You recall, most everyone listening recalls in 1999 the Columbine High School shooting,
Oh yes.
and tragic. Now, at that time, The police officers responding to the school after the 911 calls, their protocol in those days, their standard operating procedures was such that they had to wait for the special weapons attack team. Um, it was about 36, 37 minutes. As we all know, if you study these, the metadata shows that these things are over in 3 minutes. As a result of that, in 1999, and it speaks to a lack of integrated and studious, careful analysis of this and incorporating the policy. So after 1999 and Columbine, it became standard policy across the board, across the nation, that if you are receiving federal funds in your public safety organization, police department, whatever, you're required to neutralize the threat as soon as reasonably possible.
Right.
Certainly not 36 minutes. And that 23 years ago was the prevailing policy. Now, I haven't read all the after action of Uvalde, but that's the other extreme.
That's
And
the
now,
first thing that came to my mind.
yes, and I'm contrasting that because it it's sort of it's almost a disease in all these organizations. That SOP, that procedure,
We had the same problem here in Florida, not
yes, in
4 miles from where I'm standing.
and I'll talk about that one briefly. But
Yeah,
in 23 years later, we have the situation in Uvalde. The shooter was known to the police. He was known to the community, not commonly, but he was known. And putting that aside, he shows up at the school. Now, there may be some other information I'm not aware of, but on its face, from everything I've looked at, based on my uh, 49 years of experience, I have to tell you that waiting or responding 77 minutes later is almost unthinkable. It's painful to even mention this. I don't know what in the world they were thinking, what training they had, but this policy has been in existence for 23 years. What happened? And this is it speaks to a lot of the things I'm talking about because these things are common knowledge. Supposedly they are policy, but if they're not
yeah.
effectively implemented and adhered to, it's a disaster.
They're ineffective. And in Florida, it was the same thing. It was the shooter was perfectly known to the sheriff office, to the local police. Uh, I think he had something like 39 encounters with police in the year previous.
That was the most egregious thing I ever saw. Saul, you're absolutely right. I double checked that before we had our discussion here.
Yeah,
I also double checked.
I didn't, but I have a good memory.
You're
Sometimes I
spot
say,
on.
I'm not sure, but
It's
uh,
39 domestic calls to his house. There are weapons
yes,
there, and for whatever reason, I would characterize that as well as Uvalde as a catastrophic social failure. There are folks in the mix that obviously know different things. Also, his name was Nicholas Cruz, by the way, in Florida.
yes,
He was well known to all his prior fellow students, and he openly posted on social media that he wanted to be a
yes,
school shooter. Incidentally, there are many others in history, in our tragic history of school shootings, where the shooter posted many weeks ahead, many months ahead, that
yes.
he or she wanted to be a school shooter. So the point of this, and Saul, I'd like you to pick up in a second here, but the point of all this is, why aren't we sharing information effectively? And if there's a policy out there, why isn't it enforced? Why is it not adhered to? Where's the management in this? It's not like we don't have a policy. It's not like we don't have solutions. We have solutions that could certainly mitigate this. So that's part of my passion. If you want to take your focus and talk about terrorists, there are innumerable examples where they did target selection, they procured weapons of mass destruction, or implement to create a weapon of mass destruction. Common information out there, and it gets lost in the shuffle. People are afraid to be politically incorrect, or they don't know how to recognize it. So the solution is not impossible. It's just we have to change our focus and create a better team with the public.
It's not only in the U.S. I have to say, not to come to the rescue of anybody, But
Right.
I think it's a malaise that affects all of us. Um, in Spain, before the Barcelona attacks,
Yes.
uh, there was this terrorist group, well known. The leader was a chap who was cultivating
Hmm.
marijuana in Morocco and
Yes.
had a traffic of stolen cars delivered to Morocco, and the profits were reinvested into the drug trade and then drugs back to Barcelona. They were all living in government supplied houses,
Hmm.
and they were using a government paid house for a bomb factory, and they had uh, something like 340 gas tanks.
Incredible.
Now, don't tell me people see a pile of 340 gas tanks in somebody's backyard, and nobody says, "What the hell is going on there?" And I'm
It's
not going to say more because I'm not in the habit of giving formulas on these shows. But they were trying to manufacture a rather volatile explosive. Eventually, he became one with the cosmos consequence of not having it cool enough. But don't tell me, police were sent there and they noticed the gas tanks and they shrugged it off, he's talking for the winter.
well, I really think in this failure, we all own some of it, but management, in terms of making their subordinates, the public safety subordinates, accountable. I mean, I don't see the accountability. I don't see the integrated training. They have plenty of money since 9/11, all kinds of fancy equipment. The equipment's there, the training is there, but where's the will? Where's the management? Where's
Yes,
the
the
integration?
money is there.
Ah, beyond belief. So
The
these are
money
the
is there.
frustrations
The,
as
the,
they,
the Uvalde school had received nearly $500,000 a few months earlier
yes,
just to beef up security.
yes. So I don't, I just simply don't understand it. I'm aghast trying to figure out what happened here. Um, it's not that complicated. You don't have to be a super ranger to neutralize this. In fact, there were women, parents who went in, despite being told
Yes.
not to go in, that rescued their children. So this is not that difficult. The difficulty is sharing information, being accountable, and training in a collective team way for the what seems to become now the inevitable. It's just a
Yes.
horrible, horrible
I,
situation.
I have another impression. It may be unjust. I don't know all the details, I don't know all the particulars. Like you, I've seen the reports coming out of Texas and
Yes,
the videos, and I see those police officers with appropriate weaponry and shields standing a few yards from the unlocked door behind which this guy is killing babies one by one. Not babies, but a 6, 7 year old is a baby to me.
of course.
How can they stand there and then tell you we couldn't reach our supervisor?
It's just unbelievable and interesting. You say that.
I,
That
I, I don't know that I could.
yeah, well, the thing about it is, they whoever reaches a circumstance like that, they are the first responder. They are the incident commander. You can pass the leadership on as more folks arrive, but the first officer that responds to a situation like that is obligated to neutralize it as best as possible. In fact, that's
Yeah.
evolved. Many of many of the listeners tonight may not know, but since 1999, that whole standard operating procedure has evolved, and this is what frustrates me even more, because the training initially after Columbine involved police officers learning how to neutralize that type of threat as soon as
Yes.
possible. That's evolved now, and it's involved to what's considered the Hartford Consensus. And what that means is now, because Individuals are injured, obviously, in that first 3 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. So now emergency medical folks are suiting up with protective vests and training right behind the police officers so they can attend to the victims as soon as possible. So this
immediately.
has evolved. There's many iterations. It's been around for 22 years. I don't understand why it's not being adhered to.
I don't. Let me throw something that is
Yes,
related but not directly. For many years, I trained flight crews,
yes.
and among the training that we provided to them was what to do in case terrorists take over the plane. And the stance in the 70s, in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
was you do what they tell you.
Right.
If they say they have a bomb, you don't try to see if it is a bomb. You assume it is. And you do whatever it is they tell you to do. And don't forget to bring me a box of cigars when you come back from Cuba,
That's right.
because the idea was, these guys are armed. We don't want passengers or crew to die. You just comply, land in Cuba, deplane, and come back safe. 9/11 changed that formula.
That's right.
And even before anybody could be trained, the people on that United 73 realized what was going on, realized that this wasn't a vacation in Cuba, unscheduled though it may be, and decided to react and stop the plane from landing in the White House
Right.
or crashing into the White House.
Correct.
I've been more secure in the knowledge that passengers and crews will not be passive anymore than on any other security measure that we have at airports. And we have seen instances where, a crazy guy goes knocking on the cockpit door, and his pulp is delivered to police when they arrive on the plane because passengers jumped on him. How come those passengers, those crews, without training, understand the issue better than people that I always thought would have to be at the forefront of this?
That question occurs to me too. And what I think is, having trained lots of different, well, agents in my own agency, I spent a significant amount of time in our training division developing protective curricula, fitness curricula, and even investigative curricula. And frankly, what happens is, I think one of the failings in the potential failings, a lot of bureaucracies, as you go by the numbers. So it becomes rote. The missing element, unfortunately, is the creative application of it. Okay, these are the 10 steps, but life is not that neat. Life is not that predictable. You may have to use a variation or a hybrid of those 10 steps and apply it to a circumstance. No circumstances are all the same. Um, so, a classic example is the Sullenberg landing in the Hudson. That wasn't in his training in his playbook, but he was able to take value from all his education and
It,
apply it
it,
to
it was in his fingers.
yes. So that's an example. So when you talk, Saul, about the public having sort of better instincts, I really trust the public. After all, there's 330 odd, 340 odd million people out there. They know their neighborhoods better than we do, than the police do. They have instincts that we don't have. The manager at the Home Depot, for example, doesn't know the nuances of the gentlemen or the ladies that are working at the loading dock receiving goods. They know instinctively what is kosher, what's normal, versus the manager. He just looks at the bottom line. Has it been delivered? So one of our failings as a nation is we have not tapped in to those eyes and ears of smart American citizens that see things, that know something's amiss, but they haven't been given the education and they haven't been given the conduit to report this in an effective way. So that's one of the hopeful signs I have, because in my book, I'm going to be talking about the untapped security source that's right in front of us that hasn't been utilized completely.
Probably our greatest resource. Uh, Somebody in our own little uh, social media was telling me that they were seeing something, uh,
Yes.
strange movements with kids coming in and out, and described the situation, and was wondering if she should report it.
Right.
And I said, yes, don't even think about it, report it now.
Yeah.
And then the
Well,
question came, to whom?
you know, well, you're bringing up one of the my recent adjustments in the curricula. I posed this to the NYPD classes. I've trained probably upwards of 5,000, 6,000 of them in the past few years, and many other police officers. And I posed the question, what does see something, say something mean? And if I was to give you a little survey to every one of you in the class, or everyone you in your neighborhood, you come up with different answers based on cultural bias, based on upbringing, based on education, based on human differences. So the problem with see something, say something is it's much too broad. Many departments now and many organizations have given specificity to it, which makes it much more palatable, much more applicable, and something can focus on and do something about. So that's the next evolution that should be really focused on.
Yep. And it reminds me too of that woman in San Bernardino who
Yes.
realized uh, that these guys were up to no good, that they had stuff in the garage they shouldn't have, and did not report them for fear of being branded a racist.
Exactly. And that was my next point. You read my mind, Saul. That's a classic example. Another example,
I do that sometimes, you know.
certainly. Another example are the 5 of the 9/11 hijacker pilots were actually in uh, Carroll County, Maryland, staying at a $15 a night uh, motel, and they would only receive pizzas, for example. When they ordered pizzas, they wouldn't unlock the door. They would only take the pizza if it was slid through sideways with the door locked, and they gave them the
Mm.
$25, and that was it. They denied any cleaning. They did their own cleaning. They were very reclusive. In the post investigation, the FBI,
I already count four alarm bells there.
yes, absolutely. So in the post investigation, they talked to the residents of this motel, long term motel, and they said, "Oh yeah, we knew something was weird. We didn't like it, but we thought they were homosexual, so we didn't want to get involved." So that is a terrible problem in terms of bias, in missing key elements and missing clues. So you're absolutely right. So I would like to address.
Now, I see this conversation is going so smooth for me. Time has hardly passed, but we haven't gotten to the title theme,
Yes.
which is what I call the Mara fiasco, or the fiasco at Mar-a-Lago. Uh, I look at it, and I see enormous failures at every level, political, judicial. It's a judge who recuses himself because he considers himself to be biased against Trump, then signs an order to violate Trump's privacy on the flimsiest. I've never seen anything so uh, broad. Uh, I don't think it's even constitutional. Uh, Bring anything he may have written between 2017 and 2021, uh, and they did, and they committed errors like taking his passports. That would have required a special order. Never mind. And a lot of people were complaining that the Secret Service didn't do anything. Now, there are several levels to this. I'm not going to pretend that I know, but I'm going to ask you. Obviously, we're not going to have an OK Corral situation where the Secret Service has a shootout with federal agents trying to serve a search order. Uh, but I still think there are steps that were not taken that should have been taken.
Well, from my perspective, and I can give you a lot of insights. I did spend 5 years on the Presidential Protective Division as a bodyguard, but also as a security advance agent, going to many different parts of the world, creating security. Also, I came to that position from our Office of Training, where I studied assassinations and trained our rank and file agents. So having that context, and of course, since that time, that's pretty much all I do now. 85% of my time is devoted to that type of thing. But I'd like to before I answer that directly, I'd like to contrast that with the Clinton issue back in the 90s. I was asked to discuss that on CNN during a legal forum in Arlington, Virginia. And the issue was posed to me, the question was posed to me, well, what would you do? Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it was completely unprecedented at the time, and it is now as well. There's no guidebook or playbook for this. So what you have is you have two competing interests here. You have federal agents, law enforcement folks that are basically authorized and they're basically mandated to protect someone. And that's very specific. And then you may have, in the Clinton example, some potential crimes being committed or potential issues. And you may theoretically have investigators. So that creates a horrible dilemma because the agents are law enforcement officers. And so are the other folks coming in, whether it's FBI, whomever. And so you have this very difficult impasse in a way. Do I protect my protectee, even though he may or she may be committing a crime, or what do I do? And because it's so unprecedented, it was a very, very challenging period in our history. So basically, the question was posed to me: what do you do? Well, first of all, you proceed cautiously, but you communicate. And this leads me to Mar-a-Lago here. I'll talk about that in a second. So the communication has to be very clear and very crisp, and it was. And they behaved like adults, and they handled the situation, keeping their primary focus and their primary mission in the forefront, and then dealing with the investigators and other things in a civilized, constitutional way. So let me explain a little bit more, and then I'll get into this in a minute. Now, if you ask agents,
And of course, the president wasn't there, so there wasn't an immediate threat to the president anyhow.
right. But the interesting thing is, if you are putting protective agents in the position of being investigators of their protectee, what you've done is you've chilled the environment now. So there's going to be a distrust, a potential distrust, or a chill effect between your protective agents and the protectee. The bedrock of any successful protection detail is trust, absolute trust. And if you are putting agents in a position where they're having to do investigations or they're having to interact with investigators, you're going to chill the effect. Ultimately, that could threaten national security. If the protectee doesn't trust his protectors, then he or she may do things without you and thus create a problem. Now, let's move to Mar-a-Lago. My sense is, from my sources, that if there was any notice given, it was minimal. Like, okay, we're here. We'd like to look at this. Candidly, without that kind of notice, that creates a very, very dangerous situation. I don't care. If you are a committed protector, a committed agent on the protective detail or uniform officer, whatever the case may be, your instinct is to protect them. And what does that mean exactly? Well, alert, shield, and possibly evacuate. That's what we train ad nauseum. I was one of those trainers. I went to those training sessions. If you ask the agents who were involved in the Ronald Reagan assassination attempt, they'll tell you the same thing. Your instincts are to alert, shield, evacuate. And you don't get
I
involved.
told you about a
Yes,
very dear friend of mine who was one of those who carried the wounds of
yes,
his duty to his grave many years later, and he always told me that thing. This is you don't think,
that's right. It becomes instinctive.
you react to the threat
Yes. And so the scenario,
instinctively.
yeah, absolutely. So the scenario that we were faced with here in Mar-a-Lago, based on the information that I have and my collective information about security, and having been a supervisor on the president's detail, I can tell you that this is a very, very dangerous situation. Because if you're putting folks in a reactive stance, they're going to go to that conditional response. If you don't have any paperwork, if you don't have any reasonable notice, how do you know these people are official? How do we know they didn't take uniforms with FBI on the shirt or the coat? How do we know this is valid? I
We,
mean,
we, we know about terrorists pretending to be SBI for months without
absolutely.
raising an eyebrow in DC. How do you know it's not one of them?
And so now, move forward, the warrant was so open-ended, not only in terms of time, but in terms of areas to search. Uh, that would create another problem too, because Melania has a detail as well. And having this situation unfold in a matter of minutes under high stress could create lots and lots of problems because instinctively the protection agents are going to do what they're trained to do. So this this scenario, frankly, I've never seen so politicized in my life. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Uh, these things are not handled in an empirical, fair, jurisprudent way. They're being handled in a way that's almost vigilante vendetta. And so it creates a horribly dangerous situation. Knowing the agents that I know, however, they are very reserved. They will fight if necessary, but they're thoughtful, they're cerebral, they're well trained, and they probably were able to manage this pretty quickly. But I don't think they were given the proper notice to do things in a constitutional way. It seemed like there was potential there for someone to get hurt. Yes, absolutely. Someone on the outer perimeter that didn't get the word. A lot of traffic on the radio. Hard to discern and discriminate what's happening. So an extremely dangerous situation.
Well,
Yes.
would it be fair to say that only the professionalism of the Secret Service in Mar-a-Lago prevented a tragedy?
Yes, I would have to say yes. Um, all my training as an agent and when I was a trainer myself, and the whole demeanor of that agency, professionalism is at the top of its core um, strengths and core skill set. That is what we're trained to do. Be discreet, be polite, certainly, but be firm. Make decisions in a thoughtful way. Consider things in a sort of a totality of circumstance way. And in the process, do it in a professional way. So having that element, and you're right, Saul, I think prevented a potential tragedy as well. All these things collectively made it manageable. But I can tell you a very, very flashpoint, white hot potential situation there. And
Yes.
I'm just happy that nothing more serious didn't occur.
No, indeed. That's why I say the professionalism and training of the Secret Service, I think, prevented
Yes.
uh,
Now,
a nasty situation.
and frankly,
My experience with my experience with Secret Service uh, is what you just described. On occasion, I was close to presidents, three of them, and if I got too close to where I shouldn't be, uh, I used to call him the deaf because they all have the little hearing aid.
yes, we
So
weren't deaf, but
here
I
comes
remember.
a.
Yes,
No, none of them is deaf, but they all have this uh, little thing there, and they would always tell me in the most polite manner, Uh, no, you cannot go farther than these. Please move over there. And I always had the impression that had I not obliged with equal gallantry, uh, they were very much determined to take me there in whole or in pieces.
Well, I can tell you the Secret Service wouldn't politicize the agency as the FBI has sadly done. I mean, there's enough evidence now that they have become an arm, frankly, or an extension
Yeah.
of a political agenda. And it's tragic because if any agency in the planet needs to be objective, empirical, thoughtful, with good judgment, they're the ones that need to be, and they're not. And it's just, it kills me
They
to see.
have to. They have to. The Secret Service has to protect a Republican president, a Democrat president, and
This.
whatever the heck we choose to elect, with equal fervor. They
Yes,
cannot afford to be political.
I prided
But that's
myself.
not the case now with the FBI. What I
No,
see.
no, and it's creating horrible problems. That's why I would doubt if they were given ample notice. They were probably told 5 minutes ahead of time, which is really a very dangerous situation. I can tell you that all of the time that I was in the agency, 99% of us were apolitical, as you described, Saul. It didn't matter
Yes.
if you were Republican, Democrat, or independent. It was for the mission, it was for the country, it was for national security, period. So that's how we addressed it. I can give you, and again, not to, I'm just going by facts here and my experience, but I can tell you in terms of the relationship between the FBI and the Secret Service, there's always been a little bit of an undercurrent of a little bit of tension, a little bit of one-upmanship. I can tell you during a campaign year, a lot of investigations that the Secret Service does get put on the back burner. Some of the less important ones. There sometimes is cross-jurisdictional purview. What I mean by that is there are uh, violations in the law, in the statute, that the Secret Service and the FBI basically have cross jurisdiction on. So in that case, it can be a little bit problematic. Who's going to take the lead on this? Who's going to be in front of the camera saying that they took this particular operation down? That kind of thing. So there's a little bit of tension that way. But I can tell you in other examples, for example, the World Cup soccer, which I was involved with at Stanford many years ago, and the FBI insisted that they have their private room, their skiff, to do their secret analysis and name checking. And I was in a environment in the Santa Clara County area where you had the police chief for Stanford, Palo Alto, Monterey, San Jose, all folks that were very astute, well established, very competent. I was there 7 years. I can speak to that. But the FBI insisted they have their own area, their own skiff. And that was fine because they said they had a direct line on international threats and hooligans that tend to rile up the mess and wreak havoc and stir the pot at World Cup soccer events. Well, the reality was when name checks came in and questions came in, they couldn't answer them. But interestingly, the local police that were assigned to that could. And that happened also after the Boston bomber uh, fiasco in terms of trying to find the Sonar brothers, who they were identified as the bombers. They claimed they had
Yes.
special information and they didn't. So I'm just afraid that that agency has become more
That was
siloed.
another major foul up.
Yes, it was. And in all due respect, if you don't know, say so. Let's create a team. Let's find out. But to do this on innuendo and machismo and we are better and we can do this is a problem. And now the fact that they've been weaponized and are creating these kinds of issues really creates stress for me. I'll give you an anecdote. This is a verbatim anecdote, but it happened to me. I was, after the Presidential Protected Vision assignment, I was assigned as the agent in charge in San Jose. My first instinct was, well, I'm in the police chief's house here. This is not my city. This is Joe McNamara, the chief of police, who incidentally became a Hoover Fellow after he retired as police chief. He had a PhD. And I went over and I said, good afternoon. My name is Agent Cunningham. I'm the local agent in charge now, and I would like to work with you. We can take our cases beyond state lines. There are certainly cases here that we need to be aware of. I'd like to create a team. And he looked at me quizzically, and I thought, did I say something wrong? That's a reasonable offering. He said, would you like to go to lunch? And I said, yes, it'd be great. Let's go to lunch. And after he warmed up for a little bit, he said, you're not like that other agency. I said, well, this is how I've been trained. I'm in your house and I respect your house and I want to work with you together. And that's a true story. And candidly, there are thousands, and I almost hesitate to say this, there are thousands and thousands of police officers across the country. And it's the truth. Would come to me and say, these are great things you're talking about on paper, but we don't get much cooperation. And they're there for the arrest. And they're there to take the headline. But we do the gumshoe hard work. Now that's changing a little bit, but the consensus among the rank and file police officers I've worked with for the past 49 years, and so I don't say it lightly, will tell you that they have difficulty because they do the gumshoe in the weeds work, and then the Bureau comes in and oftentimes take credit away. So we have a problem moving into this.
We saw that in Ferguson too.
Yes. So there's a lot of work to be done. I'm optimistic that hopefully when things change and with possibly the political landscape changes and we get more of the public involved, we'll maybe become more proactive, more efficient, and more unified.
Yes, and I hope with a better informed public that reacts more to reasoned arguments than to appeals to emotion, because that's
Yes.
the last thing we need in this situation. Explosive situations call for reasoned action, not for emotional responses, and we are in one now. As for the other agency, I should say that it is one thing to have the resources of the federal government assisting law enforcement in their work, and it's a different one to have the federales come in.
That's right. That's right.
And the second is what's happening, and we know how that works in the countries where it exists. And it gives me chills, frankly.
Well, there's potential for improvement, but these are the realities we're seeing right now. And I hope we collectively can make a move to change this. Collectively meaning public, well-intentioned folks, and try to, as even Trump said the other day, turn down the heat here. Let's calm down. And let's try to work together as a great nation that we are. Because we do, in my humble opinion, are on the brink of losing it. And Reagan would agree with me. He said, we're just one election away from losing everything. And
yes, and one generation away from slavery.
Yes,
that was Reagan too. And having been raised in other countries where I could witness firsthand this thing, let's cooler heads prevail.
Please.
A lot of people want to respond in kind, and an eye for an eye will leave us all blind. I've seen what happens when societies collapse on themselves after generations of living in peace and freedom, and suddenly faction and sectarianism set in, and the return to savagery takes less than a decade.
Exactly.
We certainly don't want that, do we?
No.
Anyway, Larry, we have practically gotten to the hour, and I would love to continue this conversation. I'm learning a lot with you. All good things must come to an end. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your expertise. And I hope for the viewers of this show, this will be a call to cool it a little bit. And yes, things are not well. They can still be fixed. And they can only be fixed if we approach this in a rational manner and methodically, because otherwise chaos will ensue. Reagan was correct. We are an election or a generation away from losing our freedoms. And I don't think we've ever been closer.
No, unfortunately, you're absolutely right. And I'm a student of history as well, and I've been around a while. And I think you're absolutely right. But I also maintain a strong beacon of hope and optimism.
Yes.
We've been able to.
I still, like you, I'm an optimist. Uh, Even if I think we have to go through rough times, I have absolute confidence that the majority of the American people uh, can eventually see these and act appropriately
Well,
through the ballot process.
one of the great countermeasures would be becoming more informed, be knowledgeable,
Yes,
certainly vote, and become active in the whole process. All of you are
yes.
valuable. Every one of us is valuable in this process. We just need to figure out what's our goal and let's work together for each
Where
other.
we fit.
Absolutely.
Where we fit. Do we fit running for school boards or city councils or participating in the party committee for our county?
Right.
Uh, Whatever it is, do it. Be part of the process, because the least people participate, the more this ends up in the hands of a small group of fanatics that will take us down a road nobody wants to go in this country.
Well,
Anyway,
yeah,
I'd like to say Democrats, socialists may count on the support of 20% of the country. The other 80%, Republican or Democrat, don't want that.
well, I'm honored to have shared
Anyway,
some insights with you. I wish you all Godspeed. And again, I'm optimistic, and hopefully we can collectively take an empirical look at this, what's best for the country and our heritage, and move forward in that direction.
wonderful. And I look forward to talking another time with you and continue to educate people in what is going on that they may not know exactly how it works. Let's learn how everything works.
Well, I would be
And with
honored.
that,
Thank you.
thank you so much. And with that, folks, thank you so much. Please remember to make a contribution to the Gold Institute for International Strategy at the link in the description of this show. And God forbid you may throw another dime or two our way to continue producing these shows. And I'll see you next week. And Larry, once again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you with us.
Well, I'm honored and humbled, and be safe. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.